So I want to start off today, before we jump into this, into a recent controversy. And I shared an article at the very beginning, and I'll tag it here again. And you don't have to read it now, but because I'll tell you the gist of it. During Barack Obama's presidency, Barack Obama, Treasury Secretary, and Barack Obama suggested that we change the $20 bill from Andrew Jackson to this person right here. Does anybody know who this is right here? All right, Vicky, you're on it. Hannah, you're awesome. All right, so exactly, this is Harriet Tubman. And Harriet Tubman was a conductor in the Underground Railroad. She led hundreds of slaves from slavery to freedom, and she risked her own life to basically fight the institution of slavery. And everybody said, all right, first, most of our bills are men, so maybe we can replace it with a woman, and who would be more worthy than Harriet Tubman. And so they started to lay out the framework for this, and they even put out what the bill would look like. Well, President Trump comes in, and under his Treasury Secretary said, look, this isn't a change that needs to happen. This is political correctness taken to its logical end. And so let's just keep it how it is. And if somebody else wants to change it in the future, that's fine. But for right now, there's no need to change it. And so Andrew Jackson looks like he's going to be staying on the bill. And the plans to put Harriet Tubman on there are essentially put on hold. And so by the end of this chat, I want to be maybe, really discuss this. Should we honor Andrew Jackson on the $20 bill? And so I want to talk about that at the end. Once we get some information, who is he? Why is he even controversial? And should we have people like Andrew Jackson on our bill? Now, I never see Andrew Jackson's. I only see Benjamin Franklin's. All right, somebody might not get that joke. Or Ulysses S. Grant's. I only see Ulysses S. Grant. I only carry Ulysses S. Grant's. Actually, to be honest, I'll be honest, I only see George Washington's, all right? George Washington's. All Abraham Lincoln's, that's all I... On a good day, I see an Abraham Lincoln. Although now a Lincoln will only buy you a Starbucks. All right, so I want to go back here. And so today we are covering period 4. Period 4 is basically talking about how suffrage expands, which leads to the growth of political parties. And this leads into the expansion of the presidency under Andrew Jackson. So we're basically on 4.1. Now, for those of you guys that are covering, are staying with me, and you've been coming on to the streams on a weekly basis, you've been kind of seeing how much of the content we've been covering. Well, if you're on period 4, you've covered 37% of the AP US history content, which is extremely impressive because we're only at the end of October. So if you're not there, don't worry, you'll get there. But period 4 is 10% of the content in the AP US history exam. So if you follow me next week and on the weeks coming up, we're going to get to period 5. We'll reach 50% of the content. And so, which will be really impressive, saying that we're before December. All right. So real quick, if you haven't answered the poll questions yet, please take a moment to do that. All right. Okay. So I want to go over today's agenda. We're going to talk about Andrew Jackson and the War of 1812. This is where Andrew Jackson becomes famous and basically people begin to ask him to run for politics. We're going to look at 2 elections, the elections of 1824 and 1828. Significant. We're going to talk about Jackson's new presidential style and what made him so different, so controversial, and so problematic. We're going to look at the tariffs in the Bank of the U.S. or in the APU exam, because sometimes you're short for time. You might have to just write acronyms or BUS. We're going to talk about the removal of the Native Americans and Jackson's legacy. Now, for me, as I always say, and Hannah, I know you always have great ideas. So if you have a great idea, please share it. Vicky, if you have a great idea, please share it. Pineapple, you're new to the stream. This is the first time. Oh, you called me a rich guy. I see that. If you guys have any ideas on how to take notes, the best effective way on taking notes during the stream, sometimes students, they just have a notebook and they just follow along with the streams. This is period 4. standard 4.1, and then it's a great way to come back to your notes. I'll tell you what to highlight, and then you can come back when you're getting closer to the AP exam and review. But the idea is that you're actively doing something during the stream. Now, I'm working on getting a handout for every stream. We're working on that on Fiveable, so that way you guys can have something to follow along to as we're doing this. But I'm not there yet, and I'm not there for this one. So if you guys have any suggestions, Hannah, Tan, Vicky, if you have any suggestions on the best way to take notes on here, please go ahead and put it in the chat. So we're going to go ahead and get started with Andrew Jackson and the War of 1812. But before I get started, give me a thumbs up. You're still with me. Sometimes it can be kind of lonely on a chat because you feel like you're talking to yourself, which I'm used to, but all right. Awesome, guys. Jaislene, welcome back. Vicky, all right. Okay, awesome. So Vicky suggested something that you can take screenshots, and Hannah also agreed. That is an excellent idea. Every time I tell my students, go ahead and write this down, their first question is, can I take a picture? And they take a picture of it. So there's nothing wrong with that. I take pictures of things I have to remember all the time. The key is that you're doing something to help you remember. Although it has been proven that if you're writing things down as you go along, it's more likely to be remembered. Screenshots are very impersonal. You don't really take it in. Writing it down does have an impact. All right, Pineapple, let's see. I usually have Google Docs. Jason, I connect concepts of things I can relate to. Awesome. And then I type it into my notes. All right, guys. It looks like you guys are already dedicated. That would be really weird, recording, but that's funny. All right. So let's get started with Andrew Jackson. Now, here's a picture of Andrew Jackson. And Andrew Jackson is going to come to prominence during the War of 1812. As you guys know, and we talked about this in a previous stream, the War of 1812 was this second revolution. Some people called it the Second Revolution. It was a war between the Americans and the British colonists, the British, and the Americans ended up winning the war. Andrew Jackson is a general during this war, and he is going to fight in one of the most famous battles in the Battle of New Orleans. His greatest victory, though, comes after the war has ended. So they didn't have Twitter back then. They don't have Instagram. They definitely don't have Crowdcast or Fiveable. So the only way they could get information is by basically messages that would take days to deliver. Well, the war is essentially over, but Jackson and his troops move one more time in New Orleans. And on January 8th, 1815, Jackson and his troops defeat a superior British force in the Battle of New Orleans. Hundreds of British troops died, while just a handful of Americans lost their lives. And because of this battle, although this accidental battle, Jackson is going to become a national hero. And I always, just like Jaislyn said, always connecting what you know to what you learn. This sounds a lot like somebody we've learned about. So here's a bridge map. So people are to oxygen as plants are to carbon dioxide. They need it in order to survive. So Jackson is to the War of 1812 as Washington is to the American Revolution. And these are heroes of war. So this helps you understand how Jackson came out looking after the War of 1812. Just like Washington came out a national hero after the American Revolution, people were ready to elect him president. Jackson comes out with the same sort of energy after the War of 1812. So I want to read this real quick because this is from a historian. From 1812 to 1821, Jackson's military career made him a national hero. He increased wealth and opportunities. For the United States, Jackson's actions secured its southern lands, acquired millions of acres for the settlement that ultimately fueled the cotton boom, and gave Americans a new confidence or go-ahead spirit that began unbridled expansion in agriculture and manufacturing. Soon, Jackson's countrymen will introduce him as a candidate for the president of the United States. So Jackson becomes this hero. And this quote, all right, can you guys hear me now? Feel like the guy from, all right, sorry guys, I'm having some technical issues tonight, and I'm really sorry about that. Can you guys see the presentation? Can you see the presentation? All right, pineapple, awesome. So did you guys see when I got to the slide? All right, thank you, Milena. So basically what we were talking about here was that Jackson's military career gave the go-ahead to something we call Westward. Does anybody know the last word of that? Westward Expansion. All right, awesome. So Westward Expansion, after Jackson's victory, he's going to move. He fought many battles against Native Americans and moved them as a general, and he's going to do that as president as well. And after that, Jackson it becomes very popular, and people start to say, you should run for president. And he does. And that takes the election of 1824. So in 1824, Andrew Jackson is going to launch himself as a presidential candidate under the Democratic Party. He's not a Democratic Republican. He ditches that. He runs as a Democrat. And if you look here, the election of 1824, there's 4 people running for president. John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams, Jackson, this man named Crawford, and Henry Clay. And here are the states that they won. Jackson takes many of the southern states. What do these numbers represent? Like this 15, 11, 11, 3. Does anybody know? Hannah, I am with you. I really don't like Henry Clay as well. All right, exactly. These numbers here represent the electoral votes. So the more population that a state had, the more electoral votes that they have. And so Jackson wins these states over here. And as you can see, John Adams wins most of the states up here in the north, and this little area right here. Crawford wins Virginia and so on, and it's split. So what ends up happening is that Andrew Jackson wins the popular vote, but he doesn't win a majority in the electoral vote. And in order to become president, you have to win a majority in the electoral vote. So it's kind of confusing, but the election of 1824, really, there isn't a clear winner. If you just went by popular vote, Andrew Jackson would be president. So, Arthi, some states can split their votes between candidates. Some states don't. They're called winner-take-all states. And we still have that. It hasn't really changed. There are some states that they go, basically, think about Florida. Florida was won by Trump by just a couple thousand votes, and it all goes to Trump, all the electoral votes. Some people say we should change it, but it would get confusing. The Electoral College, I'm sure in the AP stream, you're going to really learn about this. But for our purposes here, we just need to know that these votes represent this. And in the election of 1824, Jackson gets the majority of the votes. So John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson are the 2 candidates that are now who essentially need to head off. Sorry, I'm like forgetting my vocabulary. Are in a head off for the election of 1824. Andrew Jackson won the popular vote, but lacked the majority of the electoral votes. The House of Representatives, which is the Congress, had to decide the candidate since no candidate had majority of the votes of the Electoral College. So this goes to the House of Representatives. Back real quick. Even though Andrew Jackson did not win the majority in the Electoral College, he did win 38%, which is 99 electoral votes, and John Quincy Adams won 84. So this goes to the Electoral College, and Andrew Jackson already has some enemies. He's a personality that's very brash, and he clashes with this man named Henry Clay. And Henry Clay has a lot of power in the House of Representatives. And Clay dislikes Andrew Jackson, and he personally mistrusts him because he doesn't have political experience. He said, look, you're just a military general. You're not a true politician. John Quincy Adams, his dad was president. I think that's a safer bet. And Adams agreed with Clay's American system for improving the roads and so on. And so Henry Clay pushes support towards Adams. And in 1824, Adams becomes the 6th president of the United States of America. And he's represented, he's elected by the representatives of the House of Representatives. Jackson's followers right away, think about all these people that voted for him. They say, you stole the election, and they call the election of 1824 the corrupt bargain. Bye, Hannah. Thanks for joining us tonight. Thank you for all the support. All right, so real quick, what was the election of 1824 called? So, as you guys will know, the election of 1824 was called the corrupt bargain. Then we moved to the election of 1828. And again, Jackson is running against John Quincy Adams. But this time, it's not even close. This is what we call a landslide victory. Jackson wins all these states in yellow, and John Quincy Adams wins all the red, and Jackson is elected president in 1828. Now, there's a few reasons why he's elected president and why these states were able to go from John Quincy Adams to Andrew Jackson. Does anybody know what happened here? Can you guys hear me? Now I'm worried that when nobody says anything in the chat, it's because, all right. Arthi, thank you, guys. All right, so I'm going to explain. So what happened here was, no problem, I'm going to explain this. So what happened was that during Adams's presidency, most states eased voter requirements. So this is very important for the AP exam. If you're writing something down, write this down. Because from 1824 to 1828, they eased voting requirements. Before, you had to be a white male and own land. In many states, by the election of 28, you just had to be white. You didn't even have to own land. And so all these people that were allowed to vote now, the expansion of suffrage, these white landless males are going to vote for Andrew Jackson. It's the people that own land that are more likely to lean towards John Quincy Adams. So all these people that don't own land tend to go for Andrew Jackson. So the expansion of voting rights, called suffrage, meant candidates had to be able to speak to the concerns of ordinary Americans. So you weren't just speaking to the educated class anymore. You were speaking to what people call the common man. And Jackson painted himself as a common man, and he painted John Quincy Adams as an elitist. What does that word elitist mean? All right, Abufo, welcome back. Yeah, exactly. A snob, somebody really uppity, somebody super educated that they don't really get in touch with the common man. And so Andrew Jackson gets all these new votes and he's elected president. So a question that appears on the AP is sometimes what happened between aristocrat. What happened between 1824 and 1828 was the expansion of suffrage to landless whites. These whites that did not own land, and that many states eased voting requirements. Now, with the expansion of voting rights, the white males, Jackson won the election of 1828 by a landslide. He was so popular that record numbers of people came to Washington to see Old Hickory inaugurated. So his nickname becomes Old Hickory. I've read about it. Basically, it's a type of wood and it's very hard and sturdy. And so they call him Old Hickory. So Andrew Jackson becomes the 7th president of the United States. And with him, he brings in all these new people participating in politics. All right, guys, how's everybody with me so far? So we've talked about Andrew Jackson in the War of 1812. We talked about the election of 1824. Now we're going to talk about Andrew Jackson's presidential style. Can you give me a thumbs up if you guys can hear me? All right, Jacelyn. Nina, welcome to the chat. Vicky, Angel, welcome. Abufo, welcome. Thank you. All right. So what is Jackson like as a president? Well, all you have to understand is the night he's inaugurated, all these people, all these common people that had never been able to visit the White House, all of a sudden say, hey, we elected this guy. We're going to go to the White House. And they run into the White House. They start breaking plates and thrashing the place. And Andrew Jackson basically has to escape through a window, and people are just drinking beer and drinking alcohol, and it's a big mess. And the people that have been in power look at this and they say, who did we elect? And they kind of put their hands on their head, like, who is this guy? And how are these people now in the White House drinking, smashing plates, and doing this? Well, right off the bat, Jackson proves to be controversial. The first thing he does, and this is very important because this always pops up on the AP, and actually, let me drink something there. Jackson is one of the most tested concepts in the AP. I've seen them in a short answer question, on a DBQ, on an LEQ. Correct, Jason, and we're going to look at a political picture there at the end. So Jackson implements something called the spoil system. And this comes from the quote, to the victor goes the spoils of the enemy. Basically, when you fight a war and you beat your enemy, you get everything that he has. You steal it because you beat him. And so Jackson says he implements the spoil system, which basically he gives jobs to all the people that supported him. Doesn't matter if they're qualified or not. It means that if you support him, you get a job. And people say, well, this isn't a good system, right? Patronage, correct, Angela. That's another word for it. Jackson's also used to state that one man with courage makes a majority. So he's calling everybody else. He's saying, look, I have courage. I can do what I need to do. He sees himself as the most important figure in politics at that time. He thinks that the people elected him, he's more important than Congress, and he's more important than the Supreme Court. His critics, just like Jacelyn brought up, attack him, and they call him, they say that he's being tyrannical, that he's not a good guy, and some call him King Andrew. So his critics attack him of, yes, you can also call that nepotism as well. When you give jobs, nepotism tends to be mostly with your family, though, although it can just be to relatives and so on. So in 1835, it's the first assassination attempt that occurred in 1835. A gunman shoots Andrew Jackson or shoots at him, doesn't kill him, but you can understand that Andrew Jackson is bringing out the division in people, this fear that he's, we won and you lost, and here my loyalists are getting these jobs and you're fired. And so it's very problematic. And this last part right here is very important. I want you guys to write this down or because in 1832, there's a court case, Georgia, and it's a Supreme Court decision where the Cherokee, we're going to talk about it, the Cherokee sue to keep their land. And the Supreme Court agrees and says you should keep their land. And Jackson says to the Supreme Court justice, who was John Marshall at that time, he said, okay, you made your decision, now enforce it. And that is a total a slap in the face to the Supreme Court justice, saying, look, you make your decisions, but I'm the one with power. I'm the one that enforces the law. And so this right here is a clear example that Jackson does not represent, he's not respecting the separation of powers, this pyramid that creates the executive, legislative, and judicial. Exactly. And Vicky, you're right. The president's job is to enforce the laws. And so by him saying that, it's showing that the Supreme Court is to judge whether the laws are constitutional or not. And this is a big problem. All right. So we saw his presidential style. He's brash. He says one man of courage makes a majority. He rewards his followers. There's an assassination attempt. And then he starts to do things that are really going to expand the power of the presidency, for better or for worse. The first thing is the nullification crisis. So what does nullification mean? It's very important that before we even jump in there, what does that word nullify or nullification mean? Yes, correct. Mafusi, he established judicial review, correct. All right, to veto, to deny, or to ignore. All those are perfect definitions. And so basically, Andrew Jackson, there's a tax put on manufactured goods. And remember, the Congress and the president has the power to tax the states. And the second thing is John C. Calhoun, who's Jackson's vice president, denounces the tariff and calls it the Tariff of Abominations. Oh, he does. There is a picture, Vicky, there is a picture of John C. Calhoun, and if you can be that guy for Halloween, you'll scare a lot of children. But John C. Calhoun calls it the Tariff of Abominations, and the AP often refers to it as the Tariff of Abominations as well. Just know that it's this tariff that was put on manufacturers' goods. And so John C. Calhoun is his vice president, but he's pushing against the president himself. So Jackson believes that the states must yield to the power of the national government. He says, look, even if you don't agree, we are the national government. You do what I say. And in 1832, Congress passed the tariff law, and South Carolina nullified it. This is referred to as the nullification crisis. And so in 1832, South Carolina says, we're not going to follow that law. And so the nullification crisis really brings up the question, can a state ignore a federal law? So that becomes a question. Can a state ignore a federal law? And Jackson becomes very angry, and he persuades Congress to pass the Force Bill of 1833, which basically means you're going to follow this tariff. And the conflict ends when Henry Clay, here's our friend again, proposes a tariff bill that would gradually lower duties over a 10-year period. But again, this puts Jackson believes that the states are subordinate to the national government. All right. The next part, hey, real quick, sorry guys. Are you with me? I know I've been talking. I'm just worried because he keeps cutting in and out. And so I've been kind of talking a lot, but are you guys with me so far? Thumbs up. All right, Pineapple, Abufo, thank you, Vicky, Angel, Nia, thank you guys. All right, awesome. Stephanie, thank you. All right, so another thing that happens is during Jackson's presidency is he begins to attack the national bank. And in 1832, the Bank of the United States asked to be rechartered. That means that it needs to be re-established. Rechartered means like you get it for a couple more years. And Jackson and his allies see the bust. So you're going to see this word bust as an advantage to the privileged few and not the benefit of all taxpayers. So they say, look, this Bank of the United States only helps the rich and wealthy. It doesn't help the common man. And so in 1836, when its charter expired, the Second Bank of the United States became just another bank. He refused to renew the charter. 5 years later, it went out of business. So this institution, this Bank of the United States, which we have now, the federal, basically the Federal Reserve, Jackson believes that this only works in the interest of the privileged. And in 1837, due to his failure of economic policy, a panic gave way, and it's called the Panic of 1837. Historians don't really come up with great names. And this led to bank closings and the collapse of the credit system, which cost people their savings. It bankrupted hundreds of business, and it put more than a third of the population out of work. So here's Jackson believing that this bank benefits the rich. He refuses to honor the charter, and it ends up actually hurting the common man. The people he went in there to protect, this bank not renewing the charter ends up hurting them. They went into something called pet banks, correct? All right, so before we move, I want to do a little quiz real quick, and I want you guys to respond. Who decided the election of 1824? The House, correct. Under who helped gain support to make John Quincy Adams the 6th president? Henry Clay. All right. Who won the popular vote in the election of 1824? Correct. Now, in 1828, why does the voting population expand? All right, Angel, you're exactly right. White suffrage and states they ease on the restrictions for voting. Correct. This is exactly right. Now, what was the spoil system? No, that would come. The technology to vote will come many years later. But it was just basically they let white men vote who didn't own office. Who didn't own land. Correct. Pineapple, office is given to people who voted for Jackson. This was a practice of rewarding your followers. Let me ask you another question. All right, hold on a sec. Let me go back here. All right. Which state refused or nullified the Tariff of 1832? South Carolina. And what did John C. Calhoun call this tariff? What did he call the tariff? The Tariff of Abominations. Perfect. And finally, why did Andrew Jackson refuse to renew the charter of the Bank of I'm looking at all these things. Why did Andrew Jackson refuse to renew the charter of the Bank of the United States? Perfect. Abufu, that's a perfect answer because he felt it was not in favor of the common man, that it was in favor of a word that starts with the E that we just talked about. Favor the elites. Perfect. Arthi, good job. So now we're going to talk about, last question. What was the outcome of Jackson's veto of the Bank of the United States? Jason, he did hate the elites, but he was in the elite himself. Perfect, guys. So one of the effects of the veto of the Bank of the United States was the Panic of 1837, and basically these banks, all this money being diverted to pet banks, and those banks crashing. Excellent job. All right, guys, hang in there. We got about 10 more minutes. You guys are doing awesome. The stream hasn't come out. Cut out. So that's even better. So let's look at one of Jackson's most controversial policies. This is why people sometimes debate whether he should even be on a bill. So he did not like Native Americans. He viewed them as inferior people. he said they can't be civilized. You can't live with them. All you can do is move them, and if they die, they die. It was kind of his mentality. So in 1830, he passes something called the Indian Removal Act of 1830 through Congress. The act provided funds to negotiate treaties that would force the Native Americans to move west. About 90 treaties were signed with the Native Americans, and they moved west. But not all the Native Americans signed these treaties, and they refused to move. They said, this is our land. We've been here for hundreds of years. We refuse to move. And they go to the Supreme Court of the United States. Does anybody remember that decision? What was that decision called? All right, very good. So exactly, but the tribal law is going to come later on. Right now, they decide, the Native Americans, they say, look, we're going to go through your system. We're going to go through the Supreme Court, and we're going to sue. And guess what? The Supreme Court agrees with them and says, you're right. You do have a right to this land. And Andrew Jackson says, John Marshall has made his decision. I want to see him enforce it. And he says, I'm not going to respect this decision. And that sets off a chain of events that leads to the Trail of Tears in 1838. Now, there were many tribes living here. The last one that moved here was the Cherokee, and they're moving to this land here in Oklahoma and Nebraska over here. And this land is not very fertile. So Jackson gives a speech, and he says, look, the land you guys are going to go to is, oh, no, sorry. The land, can you see me? All right. So he says the land you're going to go to is awesome. It's going to have the great soil. You're going to have so much fun. It's going to be better than what you have now. And this is how he sells it to the American people. But actually, we know that it was nothing like that. It was horrible, horrible land. Many of them, this journey of thousands of miles, they're going to die, and this is going to be called the Trail of Tears. So the Indian Removal Act of 1830 is going to lead to the Trail of Tears. So specifically, the Trail of Tears refers to the Cherokee who are here, who sued through the Supreme Court, and whose Jackson disregarded his decision. They're going to move through here to Oklahoma. So beginning in October and November, which is the worst months that you could possibly move, because it's right during the winter, the Cherokee were sent off in groups of 1,000 on the long journey west. I said 1,000 miles. It's an 800-mile trip that was made partly by steamboat, railroad, and foot. As winter set in, more and more Cherokee died en route. Along the way, government officials, which if it's not bad enough that you're being forcibly moved from your home, the government officials with them steal their money. People come to where the camps that they're at, and they make up with their livestock. And basically, they're being robbed on the way to this horrible situation. It's an estimated that 3,000 to 4,000 Cherokee perished along the way, and that the land they arrived at was far inferior than the land that they left. So this number of 3,000 to 4,000 Cherokee, I mean, I've seen it as high as 8,000. I don't know. This is a modest estimate, but this is a man whose policies, Andrew Jackson, led to the death of 3,000 to 4,000 Cherokee Native Americans, all because he refused to respect their land rights. Now, this is a picture that I've seen this picture in many AP exams. This picture, if you see this picture, this is a picture of the Trail of Tears. And what you can see here is you can see many people walking. This is their livestock, their little their horses, the soldiers with them, they're walking with them. Now, this picture is dark, right? And so this is not done by accident. This is a bleak, bleak moment in American history. And all these people are forcefully moving. Now, there's stories that as people died on the road, The other people, I mean, imagine if you saw your mom or your dad or your grandma die, you would stop. But some people were so tired that the people would fall over and they would just keep going. They were too tired to even grieve the dead. There's stories about that. Vicky, you're right. I mean, later on, the Americans they feel horrible about this. They give some land to the Native Americans, and many of them built casinos to make a living. So here's another picture of the Trail of Tears. This is not a very popular one, but it's important to see. This is cold. This is not a happy picture of the suffering going on. So Jackson's legacy. So Jackson is the first president. We're talking about Jackson now. He's the first president not associated with the founding fathers. John Quincy Adams, his dad was president. And Andrew Jackson is the first president to have nothing to do with the founding fathers, which is actually very impressive because that means that you don't have to be connected to George Washington. You don't have to be John Adams' son. You can be anybody and run for president. And that's why people honor this guy, is because they see him as like showing that this presidency is attainable to anybody, even in Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was a slave owner, and he owned 161 slaves, approximately, and he was known for viciously beating his slaves. And we're going to talk about that real quick. I'll tell you. He becomes the hero. Angela, I'll get to that in a sec. He becomes the hero of the War of 1812. Jackson's support for the Indian Removal Act displaced over 50,000 Native Americans. It led to the death of 3,000 to 4,000 Cherokee Native Americans. Jackson was known as a populist, and his dad was a populist. A populist is kind of like Trump, saying that I'm for the people. I'm not for government. I'm not here to cave or work together with people. I'm here, or with the Congress, I'm here for the people. A populist is they're there for the people. Okay, so if somebody calls themselves a populist, that their sell is that they are there for the people only. And he thumped his nose at the political elites. Does that make sense, Angela? So Jackson painted himself as a person that was just there for the common man. And his banking policies and bank wars led to the Panic of 1837. His veto of the Bank of the United States led to the Panic of 1837. Now, this is a picture. We're almost to the end here. Here's one of the most famous pictures of Andrew Jackson. This one I've seen on the AP exam all the time. Actually, a couple of years ago, this was a short answer question. And as you can see in this picture, this is a negative portrayal of Andrew Jackson. What is he standing on there? I know that might be a little bit difficult, but what is he standing on there? Jake, perfect. The Constitution. So I always tell my students that every word on a political cartoon is there for a purpose. They're never there accidentally. So you got to look at everything that is around there, everything around this picture. First, they call him King Andrew, and they dress him in regal clothing, which is there to signify like he's a king. He's got this wand. He's got a crown. And this is to say that he's basically become a king. He's become a monarch. This political cartoon paints a negative image of Andrew Jackson. So if you see this in the AP exam, you can talk about the clothing made to look like a king. And this is a criticism that he's accumulated too much power. What does he have here on his left hand? All right, correct. He's got this veto, and this most likely refers to the controversial veto of Congress's bill to recharter the banks in 1832. Can somebody check that real quick? I want to make sure I'm saying the right thing. I think it's 1832. I have the book here, but I said 1836. Can somebody see real quick when the bank veto was? I want to make sure this is correct. Okay, Elizabeth West, thank you. So it is 1832. I said 1836 in the last one. 1836 is when the charter is not renewed. All right, and under Jackson's foot is the Constitution. There's also another word here. That's the Internal Improvement U.S. Bank, all tattered and ripped up. This portrays Jackson's apparent disregard for both of these ideals. Jackson's refusal to accept the Supreme Court decision in Rochester versus Georgia in 1832 can also be seen as a trampling of the U.S. Constitution. So what happens is when you have this question on an AP exam, a lot of students, they say, oh, here's Andrew Jackson, and he's dressed like a king. That's something that everybody can know. So that's not going to get you points, okay? The stuff that's going to get you points is that he's stepping on the U.S. Constitution because he was seen as a tyrant. You can give the example about Rochester versus Georgia, which is an example when he did not respect the Constitution and separation of powers, and that would get you a point. So do you guys understand that it's not enough just to describe the picture? You have to give actual examples. And so, yes, he does have the veto on his hand, but if you can talk about the veto of the Bank of the United States, that's what's going to get you a point. So I've read short answer questions, and I've seen students write, oh, there's a veto and he's stepping on the Constitution and he's a king. That's all right, but that's not going to get you points on the AP. You need to talk about why he was dressed like, why they would dress him like this, because he was accumulating too much power and people thought he was seen as a king. You could talk about the cases that we just talked about, Rochester versus Georgia, his veto, his presidential style, but you have to give specific examples. You guys get that? All right. And finally, just to end here, this is Donald Trump. And Donald Trump has, he basically compares himself as a second Andrew Jackson. This is somebody who he admires, and he admires his political style. And here is Donald Trump going to his home. Does anybody, oh, what's on the picture, sorry. The Hermitage. And he goes to Andrew Jackson's grave and salutes it. And a lot of people see, correct, Jason, he put a portrait of Andrew Jackson in the White House because he sees himself as an Andrew Jackson figure, this guy who's there for the common man, and he's fighting the political elites. And that's how Donald Trump views himself. Now, we go back to this question here. So should Jackson be on the $20 bill? And having said what we just talked about, could I get a volunteer? Jason, would you be willing to come on the chat real quick and just talk about why you think he should or he shouldn't be on the $20 bill? Would you be willing to come on here? All right, so I'm going to call you up. Make sure your camera is working. So we're going to call Jason on here to talk about this. And then also, can you put I'm going to put it on the pool. Let's take a vote here. So should we, given what we know now about Jackson, while Jason is coming up, and no. All right. So I'm going to put this question up there. And Jason should be up here in a second. Let me fix this here. I want to thank you guys so much for staying with me tonight. Despite the technical difficulties, we had a great viewership tonight. So I really appreciate that. I love the interaction. Stephanie, Vicky, Jason, Bufo, Elizabeth, Nia, thank you guys all for helping me out. Vicky, I really appreciate you, Vicky. Hey, how are you? Jason.
I'm good. How are you?
How are you?
I'm great.
All
I don't
right.
know if you can hear me.
Okay. All right. So my question is, should Andrew Jackson continue to be honored on the $20 bill, given what we just talked about tonight?
I'm not really big on politics, so like I can't really answer this with I can't really answer it to the best of what I'll try to answer it to the best of what I can.
Yeah, hey,
but,
and you're doing great, and I appreciate you coming on. So relax. There's really no wrong or right. It's just your opinion. And so, what do you think? Is this a big issue? Does it matter? Should we change our money? Does it even matter who's on our money?
I don't think it's that big of an issue. I just think that we should celebrate, of course, our presidents and what they've done for us. And I think that our money should represent that as well. For the should Jackson or Tubman be on it, I don't really have a full answer to this. While I see why Jackson can be hated or can be seen as a bad guy, Tubman is also a very good person, and
Oh, so Jason, let me ask you a question. Do you
Yes.
think, like, does it matter that he owned slaves?
Post or like pre-Civil War, I think it would be pretty common to have slaves, but post-Civil War, I think that's when there would be a little more of a problem to having slaves.
Yeah, if somebody's a racist after
Yeah.
you got some love in the chat. Pineapple agrees with you. But let me ask you, does it matter that he what mistreated the Native Americans? I mean, should that matter? If you're a Native American and you see this guy on your money, how do you think that feels?
I mean, if I were to be a Native American, I'd probably feel a little bit like, a little bit of anger, as in like, wow, this person kind of like pushed my people off to the side. What Vicky said, he did have a lot of criticism on his viewpoints, which is, my teacher told me that, our teacher told us this in class today, that he was considered he was a president of, there was a word for it. He's like a transition. I don't know what the word is.
You're right. He was a transition. He was basically the separation between the founding fathers and this new democracy that we have.
Yeah.
So some people view him like that, but Jason, they disagree with you on the poll. Only 8 people in the stream tonight think that he should not be on the 20. I know maybe it's not a big deal. For some people, it is a big deal. I actually never carry money more than $1, so
Me too.
so I don't really get to the controversy. But I personally don't. I think that we should change. The people on our money should be people that we can admire, and I think there's better people than Andrew Jackson. But that's just my opinion. Am I going to, vote on that? I don't know. But I think Harriet Tubman is a figure that deserves it. But you're right. Just like you said, it matters. But hey, at that time, everybody owned slaves. This is not that crazy. So, Jason, I want to thank you so much for joining me tonight and for joining me for the last couple of weeks. I really appreciate you. And aren't you on break right now?
It's actually after school right now for me, so
okay.
I was doing homework and listening to this.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you join me next week. And I'm going to go ahead and take you out the chat, and maybe I'll bring you on next week again to discuss something. All right?
All right. Cool.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Bye. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining me tonight in tonight's stream. I want to end here by thanking Fiveable and Prince Padina for all the awesome clip art that you saw in here. Guys, I want to thank you for hanging in there with me, and I hope you guys have a wonderful night. Vicky, I got to get you on a stream soon because I want to hear your opinions on there. So, yes, let me put the link right now to the PowerPoint, and then I'm going to go ahead and log off. That's the last thing. I want to thank you guys for joining me and for hanging in there with me for all the technical difficulties. All right. My wife thinks that I thank you guys too much, but I'm truly grateful for students that are willing to put in the time to learn with me on Fiveable. So there's the link to the presentation, and bye everybody. Have a good night.